Hi, I'm Rachel Jones, along with my partner Ryan Cross. I'm going to continue to affirm the resolve the United States should imprison only those who commit violent crimes. In this speech, I'd like to go through my opponent's three contentions, systematically show why they do not stand, and time permitting, go back and crystallize my own case. My opponent's first contention states that essentially this doesn't deter crime, and that because of issues in halfway houses with quick responses to ankle bracelet situations, such as both cases that they mentioned were simply response issues, and that the ankle bracelet beeped and there wasn't quick enough emergency response. However, what we're seeing is that this is not a direct correlation between violent criminals not being in halfway houses or proof that violent criminals necessarily need to be in prison. These are clearly issues with being understaffed, with not having well-trained employees, monitoring the ankle bracelets. So what we're seeing is that, in fact, if we were able to divert the massive amount of money that my partner already mentioned that was used, that is being used to keep non-violent offenders in high-security prisons, if we divert that $40 million that we were talking about before, we can fix a lot of these issues. We can divert a lot of this money to these halfway house programs to have better response technique. So we're seeing that this contention falls because it's not able to show a direct causation between problems with nonviolent offenders and being in halfway houses. Now, their second contention is that there are nonviolent offenses that should go to prison. The three examples they said that were their only examples were child molestation, child pornography, and Ponzi schemes. To child molestation, we feel that that falls under the category, the FBI category of forcible rape. We feel this because, in a legal sense, in a legal definition, a child cannot cannot consent to sexual activity because they're under the age of consent. Thus, in a legal sense, if you cannot consent, then that is a forcible rape situation. So we feel that that point doesn't stand. On to their second, child pornography. The question we would ask here is everyone that views child pornography necessarily a violent threat to society? And we say, no more so than anyone that plays a violent video game is necessarily a violent threat to society. No more so than someone who reads poetry, or who reads, for instance, violent books is a violent threat to society. We feel that we can't just draw these causative links without really showing an actual causation. Moving on to their third point, Ponzi schemes. We go back to, this is not a violent offense. And what side AF thinks this debate really comes down to in this way is there a fundamental difference between a nonviolent crime and a violent crime? And we feel, yes, there is a fundamental difference. You can bully someone, you can launder their money, like Bernie Madoff did, but that is fundamentally different than you assaulting that person and causing them bodily harm. The legal system draws this distinction. And we feel that we should draw this distinction in the prisons as well, because you do not need someone that is a non-violent offender, who is a marijuana user, who's a drug user, in a high-security situation. It is a waste of money. Moving on to my opponent's third contentions regarding prison reform. They seem to be a little bit contradictory, in that they feel that we can't make our reforms because the government does not work at all, but their reforms about hygiene and other issues would fly through for some reason. Not really sure how this works. But what we're seeing is that essentially, if you only change the status quo in that you're saying, we are now going to have hygiene reforms, but we're going to keep all these nonviolent offenders in these high security prisons, then you're not having any more money flowing into the system, and we now need more money to institute these reforms. So what we're seeing is that given the major data states such as California, which have these big overcrowding problems, this is not a feasible option. Their second point here is that we would reform mandatory minimum sentencing. What side AF believes that this is just a scratch on the surface. My opponents have been able to show exactly zero statistics on how mandatory minimum sentencing affects the prison population as a whole, and given so, this point must fall. So going back to our contentions, we would like to really stress in this speech the fundamental role of a prison. What is the role of prisons in our society? And what Side Aft believes is that the role of the prison is to separate those who are incredibly dangerous and who are threats to society from the rest of civilians, and to reform those individuals. Well, reform, we've established, can be done on the outside. You don't need to be in a prison for that. And in terms of separating violent people from society, we need to draw a line somewhere in the sand. We have to decide that we are 200% overcrowded in our prison systems. We need to do something. What can we do? We can draw this line and say that some people, drug users, non-violent offenders, are not major threats to society enough that they need to be separated in a totally different section. And for this reason, you must affirm. Thank you.
So, you talked about the no consent being a big part of forcible rape, right? So would statute,
So you basically stated that child pornography is the same as reading a violent book, right?
I'm just saying Hitler loved poetry, so I don't think we can draw a necessary link between someone viewing child pornography and then committing violent acts. You can't
So what
draw
you're
that
saying-
link.
now what if Hitler's actions did more damage to the world? His liking of poetry or the other stuff that he did?
I'm saying that you cannot draw a link between what someone does in their leisure, what someone views in their leisure necessarily, and draw a direct link to their actions.
So I can't link that if I watch child pornography, I'm going to be more, of a criminal.
I think maybe you can draw a causation, not necessarily in a direct effect. That is why child viewers of child pornography are not violent offenders.
So you're perfectly fine with them being on the street?
I'm not saying they should be on the street. I'm saying we should
Then how are
punish
you
them in a different way.
How? If you're not going to have on the street, how?
You keep them under house arrest. You send them to frequent treatment. You make sure they check in with a parole officer weekly.
What about creators of child pornography?
If you keep them under house arrest with an electronic bracelet that you've worked
But
out
those
is
people,
functional,
those people, the
if you
creators,
cannot leave your house, then I don't...
they're just as damaging to society as people who read poetry. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, I'm saying I think you're drawing a link that you cannot necessarily draw.
So I just want to keep on going with this form of questioning, and that's that if I'm at home, and let's say, I hate saying, let's say I like to watch child pornography, and I'm at home, and I have something called a computer, what can I do?
If you're trapped in your house, you can do very little to harm society if I've outfitted you with an electronic bracelet and disallowed you from leaving.
Okay.
So, will your reforms cost money? They will, right?
They will cost money, but they'll cost less money than incredibly intensive high-security prisons.
Or is this debate just about high-security prisons? No, right?
But prisons are inherently higher security than a halfway house, and therefore are inherently more expensive.
Okay. Now, I was going to ask your partner this, but I think we can continue it here. Would you agree that prisons can reform or rehabilitate?
I believe that prisons can rehabilitate, but I also believe that rehabilitation can be done just as well on the outside.
Where else on the outside?
In halfway houses, in treatment programs, in rehabilitation programs.
When do people usually go to halfway houses?
Usually between prison and
Okay, thank you.
So
the rest of society, but treatment system and rehabilitation systems are not.
So how many people are currently in prison in the U.S.? You said 2.2 million, correct?
That's not, sure.
Okay. Oh.